Hello everybody and welcome to this online lesson of Elizabeth I's government. It's quite a big topic in lots of separate little chunks if you like. So take your time going through this, try to make sure you understand each part of the government as we go. You could be asked a question on one part of it or all of it as a whole. So take it nice and easy, pause the video as always when you need to, if you need to just have a little think about what the information is, and then do some of the tasks as well. And of course, as always with these things, if you are stuck whilst watching the video, make some notes or drop us a line just to let us know and we'll try and answer your questions. All right, let's get started. So the government in Tudor England is very similar to the government today. The government is essentially in charge of making sure the country works, laws, running the country, punishments, things like that. So I think possibly to start, before we start, one of the best ways to think about the government in Tudor England is think of an umbrella with the government being the umbrella, and underneath of the umbrella are all of these small parts, which you'll see in this online lesson. All right, so we'll start with that as a whole, and everything underneath government, so Parliament, the Queen herself, the Privy Council, all those things, they're all part of the bigger picture of government. Okay, so to think about before we get started, as with this course, some words that we perhaps may not use often, especially in some of the other courses that you might do. If you do Germany or the Cold War, they're quite modern. Some of the terms that you might see in this lesson you need to think about before we get started. So the word courtiers is a word to describe the men and the women of the nobility who spend a lot of time at court. All right, and we'll see when we talk about the court in a minute. It's not like a law court that you might immediately think about. It's basically wherever the monarch is, these courtiers will be there, usually very important people. Secondly, this word divine right monarchy. Now, hopefully you remember that from Key Stage 3. Divine right monarchy is the belief that God has chosen this monarch, so they essentially feel they can do whatever they want, because the only person that can really judge them is God. This possibly gives them that idea that they can, I don't know, kill people, I suppose, punish people, make decisions, because humans essentially can't do anything about it. So they believe in this divine right monarchy, which I think goes some way into explaining why they do some of the things that they do. And then extraordinary taxation. Okay, so quite a formal definition, but just break it down into really what it says literally. Extraordinary is something that is not ordinary, so extra to the ordinary. So like our government, we pay taxes in our wages. In a time of war, in Tudor times, the Queen may well call for some extraordinary taxation. So she'll have to get Parliament to agree to raise some extra money to fight the Spanish. So it's not something that's ordinary, all right, without going around the houses too much. It just means extra taxes that are needed at a specific time, usually for a war. Okay, so some key words there to just kind of try and get your head around before we get into this idea of government. All right, so can you just have a little think to yourself? Maybe pause the video while you think. What does government look like today in Britain? Who runs the country? Some of the pictures on the screen right now might be able to help you think about that. And then when you're ready, press play. Okay, so government today, we have obviously the Prime Minister, who has his ministers of education, of health, of armed forces, whatever it might be. And they obviously advise the Prime Minister on various things. And Parliament is in London, in the House of Lords and House of Commons, where they pass laws through both houses in order to become an official law. So lots actually is very, very similar to how we govern today, how the Prime Minister governs today. One significant difference, of course, is that the King today doesn't really have any say, I suppose, in what happens. He is now just a constitutional monarch, whereas in Tudor times, obviously, the Queen is at the very, very top. Okay, so generally speaking, lots of similarities. So let's get ourselves through this lesson now, breaking down each part of Elizabeth's government, and just remember that you need to know each of them fairly well, because you could be asked a question on one part of the government. So let's start with the Secretary of State. Okay, so we have Secretaries of State today. You will definitely have heard that term. So this particular guy that you're looking at is a guy called Cecil. He is very important. He is Elizabeth's probably main advisor, and he's with her from the very beginning of her reign, well into the 90s when he dies. Okay, so just before we talk about the Secretary of State, looking at this picture of where he lives, just pause the video and have a little inference, have a thought about what you think about William Cecil from where he lives. All right, and when you're ready, press play to carry on. All right, so I'm assuming that you've looked at this picture and you've thought, wow, this guy's quite wealthy. He's built himself a very big house. Quite clearly, he wouldn't be able to build a house like this if he wasn't wealthy. And also maybe you've inferred that he must be important. Okay, so this guy, William Cecil, is Elizabeth's chief advisor, as I've said. He oversees all of government, possibly today what I guess you might call the Prime Minister, but they didn't have a thing called the Prime Minister back in Tudor times. But essentially, William Cecil is overseeing everything, reporting everything back to Elizabeth, and of course advising Elizabeth on lots and lots of things. Now, obviously, a lot of the things that William Cecil is going to advise the Queen on are going to be to help his own interests, I guess. But generally speaking, he was a good guy who advised the Queen on every aspect of life, including war and religion. He was promoted, if you like, in 1571 to Lord Burghley was his name. So you might see this guy written down as Lord Burghley or William Cecil. It doesn't matter. They're both the same. And quite importantly is he's quite a strong Protestant. That will play a part as we go through the next couple of lessons. Bearing in mind the advice that he gives the Queen is probably going to be quite leaning towards the strengths and promotion of Protestantism. Okay, and that's just his actual signature, just because that's quite cool. So the Secretary of State, remember, is just there to advise, probably the main advisor, overseeing the whole of government, the admin, the day-to-day running of the country. So this picture here, if you want to pause the video and have a little look at the blue boxes, they are a summary essentially of what we're going to talk about in this online lesson in a much more succinct way. It might be useful if you want to make some flashcards with this information, but try to make sure that you understand at least one very specific feature of each part, as that would probably be how this question would be presented to you in an exam. Question 1, asking you one feature of one part of Elizabeth's government. So just pause the video, have a little look at these things in detail, maybe write them down or do some flashcards or a little mind map. This is a really short summary of the main bits. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail in this lesson. Okay, when you're ready, just press play and we will carry on. So let's start then with our first and probably most important bit of the government is of course the Queen herself. She is at the top of the government. She makes a lot of the decisions. All right, so the government Elizabethan England is definitely centered around the Queen or the monarch, Henry VIII, and all of those other kings and queens who came before. And this is absolutely due to the idea of divine right monarchy. Remember that God has chosen this person, therefore they should be central to everything that happens in the country. Everything that Elizabeth does, all decisions that she makes based on the advice from a Privy Council. That's another part of the government we'll talk about shortly. But she can, if she wishes, just decide on her own without listening to anybody. I'm not sure that would be particularly sensible to go against the Privy Council or Parliament for all sorts of reasons that we'll talk about when we get to those sections. So what can she do? And this is one of those nice and easy parts of this course where it's just a list of things that this Queen can do. You just need to know at least one of them really, really well as a feature of the role of the monarch. So let's start with some of the obvious things. First of all, she can declare war and she can make peace. So she, as the Queen, can decide if she takes England to war or if she brings England out of war. This plays a big part as we go through the course. She tries everything she can do to avoid going to war with Spain, partly because Spain is very powerful and much more wealthy than England is. But also, we just don't have the means to compete. So going to war for Elizabeth, especially at the beginning of her reign, when she inherits a country in debt, is absolutely the worst thing that can possibly happen. So she's going to spend a lot of her reign trying to avoid a war with Spain. It gets a little bit messy in Holland, in the Netherlands, in a couple of lessons' time. Does she go in there and help the Protestants or does she not? But the fact of the matter is, as a feature of the monarch, she can decide to go to war or make peace, even if it goes against her Privy Council and Parliament. She can also call or dismiss Parliament when she needs them and agree to or reject any laws that they vote for. So she brings a law to Parliament. We'll talk about Parliament in a bit more detail shortly. But without the Queen calling Parliament, then it doesn't sit. Whereas today, as you may be aware, Parliament does have set times when it's in session and the King can't close it down. The Prime Minister can, as you may remember Boris Johnson did during the pandemic. So that's very, very rare. That really doesn't happen that often. So in Tudor times, the Queen can call and dismiss Parliament when she needs them. It's a bit more complicated than just that. She needs Parliament probably as much as Parliament needs her, which we'll talk about shortly. But another feature is she can do that. Also, she can raise ordinary taxes. So remember, we've talked about extraordinary when there's time of war. So just usual taxes, fines, things like that, she can do, but she can't do it without Parliament. So remember what I've just said there, that for Parliament, she needs them probably as much as they need her. So it's in her interest to stay on good terms with Parliament. But she can, of course, call Parliament to raise taxes for this particular issue. She can also give titles and lands and money and jobs to whoever she wants. Obviously, if you want to try and impress the Queen, then that will get you in good favour for certain things, literally in good favour. So her favourites definitely did well out of the monarch. So it was always a good idea if you can try and impress the Queen. Also, as related to marriage and the succession and anything about foreign affairs, this was Elizabeth's decision really. It's called the royal prerogative. It's her prerogative to make these decisions, and she has many a battle with Parliament and her Privy Council, who of course wanted to get married because they need this Queen to produce an heir. When you think of all of the fuss that Henry VIII went to have an heir, a son, the norm, the expectation is that the monarch will have an heir and hopefully a spur. Whereas Elizabeth, as you know, the Virgin Queen, she's going to hold off on this and does not actually in the end produce an heir, which causes a few worries and some definite tension about what's going to happen when Elizabeth dies. But ultimately, she can decide about marriage, the succession, who will take over after her, and anything that goes on abroad. Any foreign affairs all comes down to Elizabeth. It's her prerogative, if you like, to decide on these things. People will offer advice, but she doesn't need to listen to them. All right, and then of course, when she does decide on laws or policies, she gets to enforce them, providing the laws that protect people from crime and disorder. Some may say some of the things she does is quite harsh. To dealing with internal threats or plots against her, and of course, making sure everything works effectively and legally. So that's part of her overall duty. So as you can see in that little grey box on the screen, there's a lot that she can do. You'll definitely need to be able to call on a couple of these as a feature of the monarch, ready for question 1 in the exam. Okay, so patronage is just a bit of a fancy word really for looking after your mates, looking after people, giving them something that might benefit them but also benefit you. So to provide someone with patronage, you could give them a title like the Duke of, I don't know, Suffolk or whatever. Maybe they fought in a battle and you want to reward them for something. Give them some land, maybe a house somewhere, or just some money. Then this is called patronage. It's a very effective way of really getting support from people and controlling them, because it's in their interest, isn't it, to please you. So it's a little bit, I suppose, if you want to look at it as a bit of bribery, that she will give you these things as long as you give her something back for it. But equally, she could take it away from you as quick as she gave you it. So it's also, again, in your interest to play the game, to do what Elizabeth wants you to do, and essentially not plot against her. So patronage is quite a good way of controlling some of the important people in the country. All monarchs do this. I suppose it goes on today as well, doesn't it? So that's one thing that the Queen can do as well. So why do you think, pause the video and have a little think of this question, why do you think patronage could be useful in controlling people? We've kind of talked about that already. Think about some examples maybe perhaps of where patronage could help Elizabeth, what contextually is going on, maybe in a time of a war, or a famine, or some local disturbances, or some plots, or some religious issues. Just pause the video, have a little think to yourself about when might this be a good thing for her to be able to do to control the country. Okay, when you're ready, press play and we will carry on. So a little summary of her main responsibilities again, just to make sure that you are getting your head around these things. If you've already written them down, then just look at them on the screen or listen. These are the features, remember, of the monarch. So as we've said, she can decide on policy and war, peace, religion, day-to-day running of the government. She can appoint officials, build relationships with other countries, secure the succession, and promote growth and trade with the economy. So all of the things that basically help the country run day to day is her responsibilities. She can also enforce the policy, providing laws to protect people from crime and disorder. She deals with threats to internal security and ensuring all the courts work effectively. So that's a little bit of a summary there, hopefully, these last two of what the monarch can do. And how this might look in our overall exam would be a simple question like give one feature of the monarchy herself. And also that little money issue. She can raise ordinary taxes through Parliament, and in a time of war she can raise extraordinary. Remember though that she cannot raise taxes without Parliament, which we'll talk about shortly. So exam wise, let's have a little think about how this will look in your exam. You can see on the screen right now there's a little summary at the top and feature one, and the question would be describe one feature of the role of the monarch. So I have given you a model answer here, so let's have a little look. We need 2 marks for this. We need to name the feature really clearly, quite similar to the trenches question 1. So name the feature really clearly and then give some supporting detail. So one feature of the monarch's responsibilities was that she could decide on her policies. So that's quite an open feature, but it basically tells the examiner, you know, that she decides policies. So then we need to follow that up with some information, some extra detail. I have said Elizabeth could decide, for example, to start a war or end the war, as well as appointing officials to help her run the country. So generally speaking, I feel like that could get us 2 marks. We've got our feature and we've got some supporting evidence. You could talk about specific things if you like that we've talked about in the economy, appointing officials, patronage, enforcing the laws, collecting taxes, things like that. But it's only worth 2 marks and then we move on. So maybe just pause this video, have a little look at my answer and then have a go yourself. So if the question is describe one feature of the role of the monarch, pick any of the information on the screen or go back through the video if you've missed a few bits and maybe write your own feature. It's always useful, I think, to have 2 features of anything in your mind so that we can definitely have a go at answering any question they ask. All right, when you've done that, press play and we'll move on to the next part of Elizabeth's government. Okay. So the next part is the court. Firstly, it's important to remember this is not a court as in the law court where there's a judge and jury and things like that. So the court is really important if you're trying to promote yourself. If you can somehow catch the Queen's eye at the court or other important people hobnobbing a little bit, then you could be promoting your family as well. So the court is essentially anywhere where the Queen is. Okay, and this court can travel all around the country, and it does. It's not set in one particular place. So a really important part of a government, she gets to keep people really close to her at the court. You know that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Even her enemies, even Catholics perhaps who might be plotting against her, they are at court. When the Queen invites you to court, you generally have to go. So it's a way of her sort of observing as well other things in there. So also at the court, if you think about the Cold War course, the embassies, so the ambassadors, we have, remember the telegrams, people based in each country reporting back. This is how this worked in Elizabethan England. So at the court of England would be foreign ambassadors, so Spanish ambassador, French ambassador, German ambassador, of course reporting back to their own monarch back home. What's happening in England, what's the feeling, what's Elizabeth doing. Very similar, if not exactly the same really, as the telegrams. And there will be an English ambassador in the courts of Europe. So the royal houses in Europe, they will also have their court reporting back to England. So let's get some specifics on the Elizabethan court. Okay, so if you are thinking about this before we get started, someone who is, we've talked a bit about having with the new merchant class, the rise of the gentry. You're just sort of doing okay for yourself, but you somehow find yourself at the court. Think a little bit how that might help advance yourself or your family. Maybe your daughter, you're trying to maybe marry off to the son of a noble, perhaps, or another high up merchant family, or vice versa. Or just get your product, whatever it is that you sell, how good would it be if you could get this going around the court? So it's a kind of way to sort of promote and sell yourself and your product, hopefully to make you very rich. The fact that you're even at court, you're obviously doing well for yourself. All right, so specifics then. The court is a collection of very important people, mainly the nobles, so the dukes, the earls, the lords, but also her servants, her ladies in waiting, her key servants, advisors, and friends. People that she's invited because, well, they're friends. Sometimes some may say special friends. But of course, we're just possibly reading between the lines there. So everyone's sort of mingling around and they're all trying to catch the Queen's eye. This is a bit of a place of sort of, it's a word we use, like sycophantic. That basically means is people are really creeping up to the Queen, sucking up to her, and saying everything that she wants to hear, or they think that she wants to hear, just to advance themselves. Permission is required, but if you were at court, you could try and impress her and seek her approval. We've sort of talked about that a minute ago with the gentry and these merchants. If you could somehow speak to the Queen and elevate your stock straight away, most people at the court wouldn't get anywhere near the Queen, obviously, but you do get to hobnob with some very important people. Foreign ambassadors, as we've also said, they would attend the court. It's their job to report back to their country what's going on in England. So, yeah, it's a really busy place. It's a place really where there's a lot of conniving and some backstabbing and hiding in the corners in the dark, just spying and lurking and plotting. A really sort of toxic, probably poisonous environment to be in. But an important part of Elizabeth's government. This is where she gets to keep people quite close to her. Okay, so as well as that, the formal side of it, the court is where Elizabeth is entertained. You may have seen this when you were growing up as a little kid. The jesters and magic shows and dances, all of these things happen at the court. It is really just a place of entertainment. So she'll have her special friends. Obviously, Robert Dudley, as you'll see on the screen, was a favourite at court, more so a favourite of Elizabeth than anybody else. He wasn't popular at all. But he was with Elizabeth, and really that's all that matters. Just friends, of course. So on the screen again, if you just pause it and have a look at this document, this will give you lots of examples of the things that happened at court, either with the Queen there or without the Queen there. It's a place of hobnobbing. So the bottom half is in the Queen's absence. If she's not there, everyone will play card games, maybe try and woo a lady friend, have a bit of a dance or play dice games. And then when the Queen is there, you can see tournaments, plays, music, entertainment, magic, all sorts of things, as well as maybe sometimes some important government business that might need to take place in a particular time, maybe a time of war or something. So here's a list of events at the court. Just write them in your book, or however you're doing your notes from this video. And remember, again, these are all features of the court. So again, exam-wise, let's have a little think about how this might look in our exam. So the question might say, describe one feature of the role of the court. So again, remember, we need to say the feature really, really clearly, and then we need some supporting evidence for that. So we'll start with my example of one feature of Elizabeth's court was that it was a place of entertainment. So I've gone on to talk about, I'm picking, of all the things we could talk about, entertainment. So the follow-up information now really should be maybe some of those events you've just made a list of. So the detail I've put is there are various ways to entertain the court, from jesters, magic, dancing, and tournaments. Now, I think perhaps that is a fairly safe 2 marker, but I would advise perhaps trying to get a little bit more detail in if you can, just to make sure that we do get those marks. And as previously, just pause the video now and have a little go yourself with the information at the top of the screen, or just go back through the video. Maybe do another feature of the role of the court. Try and get yourself, remember, with 2 or 3 really strong features of the court. Maybe talk about the hobnobbing that people might do to try and advance themselves, or whatever you want. So just try and get yourself really confident on at least 2 features of each part of government. And then when you're ready, we shall carry on to the next part of Elizabeth's government, which is the Privy Council. All right, now I feel like I keep saying the last one is the most important. You can decide yourself really what you think most important is. But this Privy Council is a group of really important nobles, the most important nobles in the country. I suppose you could liken it to the Prime Minister's cabinet today. So you've got the Health Minister, the Education Minister. These people are directly important to the Queen. All right, so there's some key information about the Privy Council. This is my favourite one. I feel like there's loads we can say about the Privy Council to get our 2 marks absolutely guaranteed. So, of course, you can see William Cecil again on the screen on the right. He is going to be in charge of the Privy Council. Remember, he is the Secretary of State. who essentially runs the whole show. So the Privy Council is made up of these leading advisors, as well as nobles and very senior government officials like Sir William Cecil. There are 19 members of the Privy Council. Please try and remember that number. That's one of our key facts. So 19 people sat around this table advising the Queen. Interestingly, just as an aside, Queen Mary I, Elizabeth's sister, she had 50 Privy Council members. And the reason why I think that's important is that's 50 people that are shouting at the Queen, advising the Queen of things they think is important. So just the fact that there's only 19 for Elizabeth will probably make it just a little bit easier for her to manage and get what she wants. And one of the things that you could think about here is whether or not she should surround herself with yes men, with privy councillors who'll say yes to everything she wants, or will it be better perhaps to have opposing ideas, maybe some Catholics and Protestants in the Privy Council, maybe bringing some of those 50 back from Mary's reign, because let's be honest, they may be her sisters, but they've got experience, and this is a 25-year-old queen who has not really been raised to be the queen. So I don't know, maybe you could pause the video and have a little think about that perhaps. What should this Privy Council look like if you were Elizabeth? We'll have a little think about that shortly as well. So there are 19 members of this Privy Council. They meet at least 3 times a week. Okay, so that's another key fact. Please try and remember 3 times a week. They debate current issues or current affairs, and they advise the Queen. Ultimately, though, she has the final say, and it's also up to the Privy Council to make sure that the Queen's policies are being enforced around the country. So generally, at the Privy Council, you've got the highest nobles of the land. For example, the Duke of Norfolk, who will, of course, then go back to Norfolk and ensure that the Queen's wishes and policies are being enforced there, and feeding back to the Queen what's going on in Norfolk, for example. So the Privy Council will also make sure that the rest of the government is efficient, working, influencing Parliament, though, a little bit, so lobbying, you might say. We might call that today. And they're also obviously in charge of keeping law and order as well, as these nobles have private armies that they would definitely use if they need to put down any sort of rebellion or plot. So hopefully you can see so far the Privy Council, although there are only a few of them, is very, very important. They see all, report all, and generally are the most important people in the country who are hoping to try and get the Queen to do what they want. So, as we've talked already about having only 19 Privy Councillors, so don't worry too much about that. But if you want to just pause the video and get your head around that again, or maybe make a few extra notes to answer that question in your book, then feel free to do so. But generally, it's always easier, isn't it, to get things passed or discussed with fewer members, because the more people that are there, the more they're going to want their say, and it's going to be harder to agree on anything. All right, so listen to some of Elizabeth's concerns. We'll go through these one by one. Think about some of the pros and cons of each decision. Pause the video as well if you want to write some of these down, pros and cons of each. That would be a good little task to do. So let's have a little think of the first one. So Elizabeth is thinking, should I choose nobles and gentry because of their power and class, or the men who have the most ability? So pause the video and answer in your book the pros and cons of both of those thoughts. Should she go with people who are good at their job, or people just because of their power and their class? And then we'll see when you come back to this. Okay, so you may have said something along the lines of it's better to choose the nobles because of their power, because they've got a private army that you could use if you needed it. Or you may have argued or thought that it was better to have people who are actually good at the job to make sure things are run efficiently and get done. All right, so there's one consideration. Now, all of these considerations that you're about to see are all legitimate, what Elizabeth had to think about as she was appointing or creating her Privy Council. Okay, so her next consideration is her half-sister Mary's councillors are all Catholics. She's Protestant, remember, and we've had the religious roller coaster. The people are not sure what's happening or what's going to be happening with religion. So this is quite a statement to give the people what you set up. So should you get rid of them all or keep some of them because of their own experiences? So again, pause the video, write a few ideas in your books, pros and cons of this particular consideration, and then come back and press play and we'll carry on. All right, so as I said earlier, probably the main thing to consider about is that they have experience of running the country that Elizabeth could probably call upon. It might also look quite good to the public if she at least is appointing Catholics to the Privy Council. They may see Elizabeth as less aggressive and maybe actually won't be so bad, even though she's Protestant, because at least she's given the Catholic voice to the Privy Council. Hopefully that kind of makes sense if you were thinking about the pros and cons of that. Thirdly, consideration is I need the advice of powerful nobles, but I also have to show them that I am in charge. This could be a difficult balancing act, much harder for a woman. So who should she appoint? Should she appoint, in this case then, people who will support her no matter what? Or should she keep some of those people who might not like the fact that she is a woman? So again, pause the video, pros and cons of this consideration, and then when you're ready, come back and press play. All right, so one of the ways that she can definitely show that she's in charge is to listen to whatever any of the councillors say, but then do what she wants anyway. But it was very difficult for Elizabeth at first to set the standard. Bearing in mind her sister didn't do that good a job for women, so Elizabeth's got a lot to try and do to show them that she's very capable. So I don't know, whatever your pros and cons were on this, you can't really get it wrong. It's just about thinking a little bit outside the box. Okay, so the next one, Elizabeth is thinking, should I choose people who all have the same opinions or people with a range of different views? Again, pause the video, pros and cons of this, and when you're ready, come back and press play. So yeah, she's going to choose people probably who generally support her, but it's probably wise as well to have different views in there, because Elizabeth, of course, might not see things a certain way, and sometimes by having a different opinion, you think about things a little bit differently. There's, again, as with all of these considerations, there's not really a right or wrong answer. Personally, I think she should probably have people in there of a bit of a mixed opinions as well, but she's obviously going to surround herself in the Privy Council with people mostly in support of her. And then finally then, I need men I can trust. Should I just choose men I know from the past? Similar to that previous one about bringing in some of those old councillors. So pause the video, think about your pros and cons there. Should she bring in people that she knows from her past or bring in new people now? Again, pros and cons of this. When you're ready, press play and we will continue. All right, so I feel like in this one she probably needs a bit of both. People that she can trust who will fight for her and support her, but also not to alienate other important people that she just may not have met yet in her young life. All right, so the Privy Council then, really, really, really important in running the country and enforcing the Queen's laws. So as with previous, the exam question may be, describe one feature of the role of the Privy Council. So again, we need our very, very clear opening feature. So I have picked for us one feature of the Privy Council was that it was made up of leading advisors. So the detail we need to follow up, because I've mentioned advisors, should be something to do with the kind of people in the council. Okay, so I've then followed that up with the Privy Council had 19 members and met 3 times a week to debate current issues, advising the Queen on what to do. Now, you could secure this a little bit more with some names. So you could say, for example, William Cecil is in charge. You could also say there's important nobility like the Duke of Norfolk there. Generally speaking, that should be 2 out of 2, but anything that might secure that is always worth a go. So pause the video again, have a little look at the information above, and do your own feature in your book. Just remember to get you secure on at least 2 key features of each part of government, and then if they ask us anything in your exam, you should be very, very good to go. When you're ready, press play and we will carry on. Okay, so Parliament then is the next area of government. Remember, underneath this giant umbrella of government, each of these work together. So we have the House of Lords and we have the House of Commons, just like we do today. Obviously today they are green and red. Back in Elizabethan times, they were not green and red. They were, of course, still full of lords in the House of Lords, the bishops, Catholic bishops especially. We'll talk about that in a few lessons' time, why that might be important. But generally speaking, Parliament is made up of these 2 houses, nobility and members of the gentry. You know, this new gentry class, high up people. Elizabeth can choose the members of Parliament, unlike today, of course, where they are elected. So Parliament can only be called and dismissed by the monarch. So they can't just come themselves. They have to be called by the monarch. This is why, just a little nice aside, you might have heard of MPs having 2 houses, one in London. So when they come down to London, when Parliament used to be called, they have somewhere to stay, and then they go back to their own constituencies back home. So that's generally what that is. It's a really old-fashioned way to house them when they come down to London whenever the monarch called them. So she'll call them, remember, if she needs to raise taxes or pass laws, because she can't do it on her own. This goes right back to King John with the Magna Carta when he abused his power, again, believing in divine right monarchy. that Parliament decided that the king or the monarch can't just do whatever it wants, despite what it believes. So in order for the monarch to pass laws, it needs to call Parliament. Remember, Parliament is supposed to represent the people. Okay, so another little important feature of Parliament is that Elizabeth only called it 10 times in her whole reign. So, we're talking good 40 odd years there. She only called it 10 times. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's good. She obviously didn't need to raise money or pass laws. It's probably more to do with the fact that she really couldn't stand them. However, as I said earlier, she needs Parliament as much as Parliament needs her. So in order for her to raise taxes, she calls them. Obviously, taxes come from the people. That's why it's important that Parliament is involved. But it's a little bit like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If she wants these taxes, Parliament will generally give her what she wants, but they will ask for something from her. A little bit like that. So generally speaking, when she calls Parliament and asks for money or to pass laws, they'll say, we will, Your Majesty, if you get married, or something like that, or if you reduce the punishment for a certain thing, or perhaps if you allow less taxes on a local sale of wine, say, or in King's Lynn, we've talked, haven't we, about the docks. It might be that the MP for King's Lynn asks the Queen to reduce taxes on imports, so the people of King's Lynn get a better deal. Same as today, where the MP represents their constituency. So generally, just to sum that up a little bit, is that if she wants money and laws, she'll ask Parliament. Parliament will generally give her what she wants, but they'll ask for something in return, probably usually her to get married, because they want stability and security. They'd like to see an heir to the throne and things like that. She did snap once that Parliament, they kept going on about this marriage, and she snapped at them saying that it is foolish that the feet should rule the head. So that's just one of many Elizabeth's many sort of jibes or attacks when she calls Parliament. But just have a little think about that statement. She says it's foolish for the feet to think they should rule the head. So she's the head here, isn't she? And she's basically putting them in their place, saying, you don't tell me what to do, even though probably through gritted teeth she knows that she needs them just as much as they need her. All right, so some features of Parliament is she's going to pass new laws, and they will offer advice to the Queen as well, usually on who to get married to or a foreign event. She can raise the extraordinary taxation that we've talked about during a time of need, so usually a war or a famine. And any acts of Parliament, so that's what we call them today, an act is a law, could be enforced. So once it's passed through Parliament, it is therefore law. Any important policies, usually to do with religion or the poor, were presented to Parliament for its approval and then enforced by the Privy Council in the local areas, or as you'll see at the end of this lesson, there is a form of local government that might well make sure these things happen. So she uses her royal prerogative to stop Parliament discussing anything she doesn't want to talk about, usually succession and marriage. That's again where she talks about it being foolish for the feet to rule the head. But she'll listen and she'll go through the motions. It's almost a bit of a game, really, when she calls Parliament. All right, so what problem do you think the House of Lords having Catholic bishops in might cause Elizabeth? Particularly if you're watching this as revision, near the time of your exams, you'll know about the religious settlement. So just pause it, have a little write in your book, or have a little think what problems that might cause having Catholic bishops in the House of Lords. Bearing in mind what you may already know, you should do, from citizenship, that in order to pass a law, they have to go through both houses. Okay, and then when you're ready, press play and we will carry on. Okay, so you might think about the problem there that the House of Lords, they're going to vote against anything that she says, especially if it's related to being Protestant or turning the country Protestant. And that does play a little bit of a part in the religious settlement, one of Elizabeth's many very, very clever ways of getting around a specific situation, shall we say. So that is where the problem might be, that she's got to try and get these laws passed, and Catholics in there might not do that much because, of course, they don't like Protestants. So these images are what we would essentially see in a Tudor Parliament, very different to today, although you can see, can't you, a gathering of MPs with the Queen at the top. So what can you see going on? Have a little pause of the video, reading this yellow box. What's going on? What do you think you can see? Are there anything in these pictures that show her power, any similarities to today's Parliament? And if there are any questions or observations, write them down and let us know. But generally speaking, you can see when you're ready to press play, you get the idea. So Elizabeth is at the top in that one, the black and white picture, as is on the colour picture. I think it's a little bit later on. It looks a bit Georgian to me, that period. But the Queen is definitely at the top. Important people right in front of her. You can just about make out of the top. Next to Elizabeth is what looks like William Cecil. So this is a gathering of people. She's there talking directly to the Parliament, asking them for money, for taxes or for laws. And they're saying to her, but we want, but we want, but we want. All right, so very similar as it is today, I suppose, with the two sides of the House particularly. Okay, so little summary then of Parliament, just some of those extra features that we can get into our question 1. There were no political parties like there are today, so no Labour and Lib Dem or Reform UK or anything like that. There is no Prime Minister, as we've said. Only wealthy men could vote or become MPs. And this goes right into the 19th century, doesn't it, when men are allowed to vote. Then, of course, the suffragettes at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century fighting for women. But in the 1500s, absolutely only wealthy men can vote or become MPs. The rest of the country, 90% of them, remember, are probably farming the land, just surviving. Candidates are up for election were decided by the Privy Council. So basically, they're going to pick people who they want in there, aren't they? But of course, with their Privy Council being mixed between Catholics, Protestants, you could obviously understand there might be a little bit of a debate, shall we say, on who's up for election for that. And of course, with that comes perks of being a member of Parliament, just like it does today. So it's in people's interest, similar to that patronage idea, for them to do the right thing. All right, so this might help Elizabeth in lots of ways, because she can put people in there who will obviously support her, but especially when voting. So they're going to vote through her laws quite easily. So she's going to fill her Parliament full of Protestants, I'd imagine. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It doesn't sound fair, but as it's only rich people that can vote anyway, it is kind of how it is. All right. Although MPs claimed the right to freedom of speech, often they were sent to the Tower of London if they went too far, in Elizabeth's opinion. So they might say something to her in Parliament that they thought was funny or acceptable because they are representing the people. But she can definitely put them in their place. And that was one of the ways that she had to show power. So absolutely, the question there is, how might this give her more control? Quite clearly, anyone who steps out of line, she can get rid of them. And they're not likely to do it again. So they generally watch what they say to her. So again, question. Now, you haven't got any help in this one. So hopefully, as we've done a couple together with some help at the top, you'll be able to have a good go at this one yourself. But if not, just rewind the video, pause the video and answer the question. Describe one feature of the role of Parliament. All right, so again, I'll start with mine. So one feature of Parliament was that it was called by the Queen in order to pass laws or raise taxes. Okay, so now the detail that needs to follow up to support that feature is going to be something to do with when or what laws or what taxes. So Elizabeth called Parliament 10 times in her whole reign, usually at a time of crisis, for example, war or famine. Now again, that could be just about enough for your 2 marks. But again, try and get a bit more detail in there, perhaps an example of some laws or specific taxes or things like that. But that generally should be enough. As always then, pause the video, have a little think yourself of your own feature of Parliament, and then when you're ready, come back, press play, and we'll finish off Elizabeth's government. Okay, so if we finish off this little topic now with the local government, so that essentially just means the local areas. Remember, there is only one Queen. There is no police force in Tudor England. So in order to tell people about the laws that have just been passed in London, you know, there's no television, there's no internet. Although we are in this Renaissance period, aren't we, where we've got printing press, so things can be printed a lot easier. But it's going to be the local government that tell people and punish people. All right, so one part of the local government is the Lords Lieutenants. We do have a Lord Lieutenant still today. Norfolk has one. We got a letter, the school got a letter from the Lord Lieutenant after COVID, just saying thank you for everything we did as a community. So they're still there, which is quite cool, and they still have the same seal that you can see on the screen. So these next two, the last two, aren't as interesting, I don't think, as the other parts of government, but certainly probably important because these are the ones that get down to the nitty-gritty day-to-day stuff for everyday people. All right, so firstly, each county has a Lord Lieutenant chosen by the monarch, of course, that is her prerogative. They were members of the nobility and were also on the Privy Council. So can you see how they can report back things that are going on in the local areas? Perhaps people aren't going to church or aren't obeying the laws. They report back to the Privy Council, and then punishment may well be given out where appropriate. They were essential to maintaining the monarch's power and England's defences in the local areas. As we've said, this is because the Queen and the main nobility can't really police the whole of a county. So these people do that. They have little private, I suppose, forces, if you like, to assist them in their enforcing. All right, so these people that they use are local militia, so soldiers basically, overseeing county defences in case England was attacked, but also making sure that everyone does what they're supposed to do. They ensured that the Queen's laws were enforced by people far away from central government by giving orders to the JPs, which we'll look at lastly in a minute. They are just a second part of the local government. So the Lord Lieutenants, definitely not that interesting compared to the Privy Council and Parliament and the Court, but I feel it's quite straightforward. So if you have a little think yourself, one feature of the Lord Lieutenant in a full sentence using one of those facts in your book or wherever you do in your notes watching this video, and then when you're ready, press play and we will finish off. Alright, so the next part of the local government is the Justices of the Peace, JPs. We still have JPs today. So they are essentially, as the name suggests, going to try and ensure everything remains peaceful and in line. So JPs are members of the nobility and the gentry. Alright, some of them are really important, some of them less so. But within a local area, they are important. They perhaps have an important shop or something, but generally speaking, they are important in the local area. Interestingly, though, the JPs are not paid, which is kind of, you think, well, why would you do it? But think about the importance, think about the swagger that you could have or the status in the local town if you were the JP. People would very much be interested in trying to be on your good side because you've got potential power to punish these people. All right, so it's very, very valuable for status, particularly as you have direct access to those 19 Privy Councillors. I can think of a time perhaps when being a JP might not be so good, but we'll talk about that maybe in a sec. So they make sure all of Elizabeth's and Parliament's social and economic policies are carried out. It's up to them to tell the local people what the new laws are, how you have to go to church. If you don't, you're going to get fined this, that or the other. And for more serious crimes, the JPs might step up and become judges in local courts. So these courts might crop up every 3 months and you would possibly be in jail waiting for the next time the court comes up. As I've just said a minute ago, this might be a time where the JPs might not be so popular. Think about if you put someone in jail or you punish someone in the stocks in the street and perhaps for some reason you anger the Queen and you lose your position as the JP. Yeah, you could be in trouble next time they see you down the pub. So there was always that risky thing as well for a JP to think about. But whilst they are JPs, you generally would not be able to do anything to them because you would definitely fall foul of the law and the Privy Council. So again, one feature of the JPs, this one's a little bit less easy because there's less for you to know about them, but basically your feature is they enforce the laws in the locations, telling people the laws, and also that they act as judges in the local courts every 3 months. They've got quite an important role within the local government. I don't know if it's as important as the other features of government, but you could argue, definitely could argue, that if it wasn't for the local government, it doesn't really matter what they do in London, does it? So that's one thing to think about when you are looking at that. All right, so to finish this little online lesson, a summary again, slightly different to the summary at the start of the online lesson, but the features of the government, if you can learn this page here, maybe with some flashcards, then you have at least one feature of every part of government, which I would be very confident in you getting 2 out of 2 every single time. All right, so please take the time to fully understand the summary of the topic. Hopefully you've made some valuable notes and got some useful ideas from this video, but this screen that you're looking at right now is really, really quite important in summarising the whole event. and then maybe have a little think about why each of these parts of the government will be most important to Elizabeth, and why, and even possibly when. All right, so thank you very much once again, and remember that all of our lessons in either video form or online documents are available at our website at www.stchistory.com, as well as supporting documents on our Google Classrooms too. If you do have any questions after following this lesson, please just drop us a line or come and see us, and we will see you next time for the next Elizabeth lesson. Thank you and goodbye.